This all came together in a very unusual way. But before I begin, let me say this. To me, filmmaking originated as a rich person's game. Once not so long ago, the cost of a camera alone was in the hundreds of thousands, not taking into account the price of film and the processing cost, which was highly unpredictable in itself. Where we are now, for a few $1,000s, you can own a camera and beautiful lenses that are capable of producing an image better than the ones in The Godfather, as my brother often reminds me. What used to take hundreds of people can now be done with a handful, and yes, in the same quality, if not in some cases even better. This doesn't mean the cost has vanished altogether. It just means that you will pay with your time. Time is the ultimate currency. At least, this is how I see it. And it's important for me to note this because 2/3 of the film were shot with a Panasonic GH4 and a whole lot of time. All right, now let's begin. The idea originally was to make a TV series that was manageable enough to film with very few resources. I've never considered myself a writer, so I reached out to a few friends of mine to write something that I would be able to film in one location. A few days later, I received an email. A 25-page script episode had been written by my friend Richard Etchinson. The only problem? I didn't have a budget. So, almost every shot would have to be designed in a way that it could be filmed by myself, keeping camera movements to a minimum and only used when absolutely necessary. So without wasting any time, I began compiling a shot list for what would become the first 27 minutes of the feature film. I bought 2 cheap bicolor LED panels, 2 even cheaper softboxes from Amazon, some light dimmers, and some old incandescent lights. This made the entirety of my lighting package for this segment with a total cost of $125. With the placement of practical lights for separation from backgrounds, I was able to add depth to every shot, taking almost an entire day to film one scene. Making the fast, good, cheap pyramid the center philosophy for the entire project. Not having a crew for 98% of the segment meant that I would have to take my time if I wanted this to be good. I mentioned this before in other videos, but here it is again in brief. This is the pyramid. At each corner sits an approach. Fast, good, cheap. But the rule is you can only choose 2. If you want it to be good and fast, it will not be cheap. If you want it to be cheap and good, it will not be fast. Estimating correctly how many days it would take to film a scene played a huge part in how it would turn out in the end, especially when I lean towards more time if I don't have a budget. On a practical level, lighting, cinematography, sound, and cast determine how the end project turns out. So using natural lighting or filming in an environment that allowed me for more control was extremely beneficial to the project. With 27 minutes of the project shot, it's time to move on to another segment. This one was written by my friend Craig McNulty, the majority of the dialogue anyway. The tricky thing with this one is that although it was written to mostly take place in an abandoned cabin in the woods, the intro takes place over time, which means I need to find a way to film our apartment in a strategic way to make it feel different enough since the whole film takes place across parallel realities. This means changing the color of walls and rearranging furniture. But first, it's important to focus on the biggest portion of the segment, where most of the dialogue takes place. The cabin. Setting aside 3 days for 8 pages of straight dialogue that would be filmed mostly in one take with 2 cameras for split screens seemed appropriate. With a tiny crew of 5, including myself, my friend Diego, Clem, Leah, and the mother of my children and actress Mayan for full support. 1 day would be used for travel, loading, and lighting, leaving 1 day for filming and 1 day as a buffer in case things go wrong and more time is needed. Also, since this 8-page scene takes place at night, I need Fresnel light to go outside of the roof of the cabin to simulate moonlight. And this is where roughly $1,000 was spent. So far, that's a total of about $1,125, roughly. After spending a whole evening shooting the wide master shot of the scene, I realized it didn't look great. This was because it wasn't lit perfectly from my end, and the GH4 being a camera that does not shoot RAW meant that whatever the image captured looked like was more or less what it would end up being because of the limitations of the camera. Color correction only serves as a way of changing tint and minimal color tweaks for this camera. So we quickly devised a plan to block the cabin windows during the day and then shoot our split-screen one-take coverage during that time, leaving us with the evening to be able to reshoot the wide shot that I had screwed up earlier. Once again proving to myself that contingency days are vital. Now for the opening of this segment. Here we go. I first need to repaint the room and production design the colors and palette to match the tone and feel. Spending roughly a week doing this and completing one scene of about 15 seconds. This whole intro was very visual since it's the contrast of a cabin where it's loaded with dialogue, so the visual aspect has to drive the story. This makes it a challenge, especially on a budget without a production design team. And since this takes place in a retro 80s future parallel universe, the thrift store played a big part in helping us with the props and clothing for certain scenes. Raising the budget to about $2,000 roughly, again, at this point. Sleeping with the mattress on the floor became part of our lives for months to help us maximize our home and location. Shooting plates of myself to create what would become my favorite simple VFX, the hologram. Then later moving furniture around to redress the same room to match and make other locations. For this sequence, my friends were kind enough to let me film in their warehouse in New Jersey, this time with our friend Duffy operating a small Crane 2 gimbal for some of the shots. But with limited time, not all the coverage was attained. I was stuck. But by re-strategizing, I was able to shoot some of the close-ups needed in our bedroom by myself once again by redressing it. For this party sequence, the help of our friend Duffy once again came into play along with our beautiful friends. We strategized a retro 80s party. I redressed our living room again, invited everyone over, and used a hazer to make this all more cinematic. Not having to worry about dialogue once again for this made it all more manageable and possible at this scale. The only downside was, because of the hazer, the AC had to be off in the middle of summer and man was it hot. The third segment. And what is the opening of the film was written, directed, and shot by my friend Zach Mulligan. My aunt and I had a baby at this point, so for this, extra help would be needed. And since Zach wrote this and is a professional DP, it only made sense that he directed it. This segment was shot with a red Komodo. This section took place in an ominous remote location during what was supposed to be always night. So we blocked out all the windows with plastic black tarps so we could film during daylight hours and get the most of our time. This segment was the most costly and where about the remaining $3,000 was spent. This was also where the most help was needed because we were dealing with a lot of food props for the film as well as a small window time for access to the location and, of course, our baby, which we would need a sitter for while my aunt and I were moving lights, dealing with props, and focusing on acting, all on limited time. In total, we were a crew of 7, including myself, and on the last day, my friend Clem once again came to the rescue, making us 8. The entire segment was mostly lit with 3-tube RGB lights over the span of 3 days. This was tough as more time was needed. By splitting every scene in order of location or room, we managed to get by, but even with 7 of us, it was not simple because of time limitations. Eventually, we did not manage to film every room as planned and had to film all the bathroom scenes in our bathroom a month later during the pandemic, including some reshoots. So by connecting a private feed via YouTube, Zach was able to view the camera feed while I filmed my aunt with a Blackmagic Pocket 6K during the evening when our baby was sleeping. In some cases, having to recreate elaborate lighting setups in our apartment to match the original shots. Okay. After many years, Heartbreakers is finally complete. But because of nudity, I cannot release it on YouTube. If you're interested in watching the film in its entirety, please make sure to check it out on Amazon Prime. Thanks again for watching. Oh yeah. And please, subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to the channel.